A 14-year-old girl stood silently before the altar of the chapel within the castle of Ainers, encased in a splendid white satin gown that shimmered with intricate embroidery of gold threads. Her soft, youthful face was a mask of tension as her eyes remained fixed on her trembling hands, refusing to meet the gaze of the man who stood beside her. He was a 28-year-old king, Charles VII of France, whose armies had recently laid waste to her homeland, slaughtering her soldiers and executing her allies. The weight of the moment was palpable, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the monotonous drone of the archbishop conducting the ceremony. Among the sparse assembly of witnesses, expressions of triumph intermingled with pity. They were not merely witnessing a wedding, they were bearing witness to the tragic demise of a nation. When she finally spoke her vows in a voice barely above a whisper and left behind not only her own fate but also the legacy of a duchy that had endured for nearly 1,000 years. This girl was one of Brittany, and her groom a man who had wrought such devastation upon her people was Charles VII, King of France. The date was December 6, 1491, the day the last sovereign Duchess of Brittany was compelled to marry the very man responsible for the destruction of her family and the subjugation of her homeland. The story of Anne of Brittany unfolds as one of the most extraordinary narratives of political manipulation and personal sacrifice in European history. How was it possible for such a young girl to be coerced into the arms of the man who had crushed her army, hunted her family, and dismantled her legacy? And how, despite this humiliating beginning, did she rise to become one of the most powerful and respected queens in France's history? To unravel this perplexing paradox, we must delve back to the beginnings of the tale, examining the confluence of circumstances that transformed a provincial princess into a central pawn on the brutal geopolitical chessboard of the late 15th century. Born on January 25, 1477, at the Château of Nau, and was the first child of Duke Francis II of Brittany and his second wife, Margaret of Foix. At the time of her birth, Brittany was a prosperous and fiercely independent duchy situated on the peninsula at the far northwestern edge of what is now modern France. Despite being technically a vassal of the French crown, Brittany maintained its own language, rich Celtic traditions, a self-governing parliament, and, crucially, the right to pursue an independent foreign policy that often ran counter to French interests. Duke Francis II, Anne's father, was an astute ruler who deftly navigated the tangled rivalries among France and its frequent enemies England, Burgundy, and the formidable ascendants of Spain. The duchy's autonomy was sustained through a precarious balance of shifting alliances, with Francis leveraging Brittany's strategic coastal position to secure protections from France's adversaries. Anne's birth initially brought disappointment to her father, who desperately longed for a male heir to ensure the continuation of the family line. However, when a second daughter, Isabel, arrived 3 years later and no son was forthcoming, Francis gradually accepted the reality that Anne would one day inherit the duchy. This shift in perspective fundamentally shaped her upbringing and education, distinguishing her from the majority of girls of her time. While most 15th-century princesses received only basic instruction in religion, music, and household management and was meticulously groomed for leadership, her education was comprehensive, steeped in humanist principles. She became fluent in Breton, French, Latin, and Greek. She studied mathematics, history, ducal and international law, and was trained in the complexities of governance and diplomacy. Recognizing Anne as his sole hope for preserving Brittany's independence, her father made it imperative that she be intellectually prepared for the formidable challenges that lay ahead. Contemporary chroniclers characterized Anne as small in stature and noticeably lame, the result of a slight difference in the length of her legs. Nevertheless, her posture was regal, her gaze keenly intelligent, and her presence commanding. More crucial than her physical attributes was her character stubborn, often defiant, with a mind as sharp as a blade and a will that could withstand immense pressure. These qualities, nurtured as vital virtues, would be tested to their utmost limits in the tumultuous years that followed. At the tender age of 9, the looming threat to Brittany's independence began to take a more tangible form. The death of Louis XI of France, often referred to as the universal spider for his intricate web of political machinations, in 1483 left the throne to his young son, Charles VIII. Despite his youth, Charles inherited not only the crown but also the same obsession as his predecessors to annex Brittany into the French realm completely. During his minority, the kingdom was governed by his elder sister, Anne of Beaujeu, a regent as shrewd and relentless as their father. Under her rule, the pressure upon Brittany mounted dramatically. Sensing the impending storm, Duke Francis set out to secure powerful allies and, more crucially, a suitable husband for his daughter, one who could protect Brittany against the rapacious ambitions of France. After lengthy negotiations, a marriage was arranged with Maximilian of Austria, a widower and Holy Roman Emperor, one of the few European rulers strong enough to counter France. In December 1490, Anne of Brittany was married to Maximilian by proxy, her husband absent from the ceremony while a representative stood in his place. This peculiar medieval ritual included a symbolic act in which the representative placed his bare leg in the bridal bed to signify consummation, although no actual union took place. This marriage by proxy, which would never be consummated physically, ignited a disastrous turn of events. For France, the prospect of Brittany aligning with the Habsburg Empire posed a significant strategic challenge. Swiftly, they declared the marriage invalid, claiming dubious legal grounds for lacking royal consent. Although they had no lawful authority over the independent duchy, Charles VIII launched a full-scale invasion of Brittany. The modernized French army met with little effective resistance, as Breton forces loyal to Duke Francis were defeated in a series of engagements culminating in the catastrophic Battle of Saint-Aubin-du-Cormier in July 1488. The defeat was devastating on both military and personal levels for Anne. Her father, already in poor health, succumbed under the immense strain of war and passed away just weeks later, at the age of 14, and was left an orphan and a duchess in name only. French forces occupied nearly all her lands, and her most trusted advisors were either dead or captured. With her European allies unwilling or unable to provide meaningful assistance, and Maximilian entangled in conflicts of his own, and found herself facing escalating desperation. By September 1491, the French siege of Rennes, where the young duchess orchestrated a valiant defense, had tightened significantly. She personally rallied her troops on the ramparts and rationed supplies in a desperate bid to prolong the resistance. Yet, as winter approached and provisions dwindled, the circumstances became untenable. It was then that Charles VIII made his audacious proposal and must renounce her unconsummated marriage to Maximilian and instead marry him, the very man whose lust for power had precipitated her father's death and devastated her homeland. The implied alternative was stark. Refusal would lead to her execution for treason for allying with a sworn enemy of France and result in the complete annexation of Brittany with no promises of autonomy. Historians continue to debate the extent of physical coercion that influenced Anne's decision. Some contemporary accounts suggest she was effectively kept prisoner, while official French sources painted the proposal as a diplomatic resolution. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. What is irrefutable is that on December 6, 1491, at the Château of Langeau in the Loire Valley, Anne of Brittany married Charles VII, becoming the queen consort of France. The marriage contract itself was a remarkable exercise in legal maneuvering, proclaiming both the union of the two crowns and the pledge to uphold Breton autonomy. Yet it also contained clauses ensuring that if Charles died without an heir and would be compelled to marry his successor, thereby securing Brittany's permanent incorporation into the French realm. The ceremony, described by witnesses as somber and fraught with tension, bore more resemblance to a funeral than a festivity. The subsequent banquet saw the new queen remain silent, offering only curt nods in response to attempts at conversation. In the solitude of her private chambers that evening, a lady-in-waiting reported that Anne wept throughout the night, not as a joyous bride but as a grieving widow. No one could have predicted that this humiliated young princess would soon embark on one of the most remarkable transformations in royal history, evolving from a conquered bride into a formidable political force. Upon her arrival at the French court in Paris, Anne was met with overt hostility. To many, she remained the rebellious duchess, a foreigner unwillingly thrust into her new role. The court was dominated by Anne of Beaujeu, the king's elder sister and former regent, who wielded tremendous influence. Following her lead, courtiers treated the newly crowned queen with barely concealed disdain. Yet Anne revealed herself as a strategic thinker, aware of the value of patience in a hostile environment. Instead of confronting her adversaries directly, she focused on winning her husband's trust, the very man whose ambition had stripped her of her homeland. Drawing upon her exceptional education, Anne impressed Charles, who was notably less well-read, by demonstrating her command of literature, history, and music. She learned to navigate his passions, particularly his growing fascination with Italian culture and his ambitions regarding the Kingdom of Naples. Gradually, Charles began to seek her counsel on matters of state, uncovering in her a shrewd and measured advisor. When he embarked on his ill-fated Italian campaign in 1494, it was Anne who was appointed as regent, further consolidating her influence at court. The shift in her position was swift and remarkable. Within just 2 years, the perception of her had transformed from that of a little Breton captive, as described by a Venetian envoy, to being recognized as the true political mind behind the throne by an Italian diplomat. Anne's relationship with Charles exhibited a complex nature. He was not the entirely villainous figure she had imagined, though he was far from an ideal romantic partner. Chroniclers depicted him as physically unremarkable, with a head that appeared too large for his body, a prominent nose, and slightly parted lips. Intellectually, he was limited, prone to rapid mood swings that oscillated between generosity and pettiness. Nonetheless, to many observers' surprise, he developed a genuine respect for Anne's intelligence, treating her with a level of dignity rarely afforded to a wife in an arrangement born of coercion. In 1495, Anne became pregnant for the first time, but tragedy struck when her son lived only a mere 3 weeks. Their shared grief brought the royal couple closer together, not in a romantic sense, but through a profound mutual sorrow. In the following 3 years, Anne faced 2 more pregnancies, each culminating in heart-wrenching loss as her children succumbed to infancy. Amid these personal tragedies, Anne remained deeply invested in the welfare of Brittany. As Queen of France, she worked tirelessly to protect Breton interests, ensuring her loyal officials held key positions and that the autonomy promised in her marriage contract was honored in practice. She created a buffer zone of Breton culture within the French court, steadfastly upholding the language and traditions of her homeland. This fragile equilibrium shattered on April 7, 1498. After striking his head on a low doorway while hurriedly moving through the Château de Plessis-les-Tours, Charles VII initially seemed unscathed. However, hours later, he collapsed and died, likely from a cerebral hemorrhage. In an instant, Anne's position transformed. She was no longer the queen consort of France. At just 21, she reclaimed her status as the sovereign Duchess of Brittany. According to the terms of her marriage contract, the union between France and Brittany was now technically dissolved, enabling her to resume rule in Nantes with the autonomy she had long sought. In the subsequent 9 months, Anne governed Brittany as a true sovereign, reversing numerous policies imposed by the French crown and reaffirming alliances with England and Spain. Yet, her window of freedom was destined to be brief. The new king, Louis XII, a cousin of Charles VII, was resolute in his efforts to maintain French control over Brittany. However, his methods diverged significantly from those of his predecessors. Louis XII, who was tall, militarily adept, and a renowned patron of the arts, embodied a practicality seldom seen among monarchs of his era. Stuck in a childless, unhappy marriage to Joan of France, which had been politically arranged, Louis recognized in Anne both a path to personal escape and an opportunity for political alliance. He approached Pope Alexander VI with a request for annulment, citing non-consummation and coercion parallels to the arguments once wielded against Anne's earlier marriage to Maximilian. Concurrently, he extended an invitation to Anne to marry him, offering the prospect of becoming Queen of France once more, but under terms vastly more favorable to Brittany's sovereignty. This new marriage contract would explicitly recognize Anne as the sovereign ruler of Brittany, allowing her to govern the duchy directly while maintaining her own administration. It also contained a groundbreaking clause stipulating that Brittany would only become part of France should the couple produce children together. If they bore no heirs, the duchy would revert to an independent Breton lineage. For Anne, the proposal represented a daunting dilemma. On one side, marrying Louis meant returning to a court that had once belittled her. On the other, the opportunities presented were more aligned with her vision of Breton independence than anything seen before. After several weeks of intense negotiations, during which she secured even greater concessions and made her decision, on January 8, 1499, she wed Louis XII in Nantes, becoming the only woman in history to serve as Queen of France twice, each time to a different husband. The ceremony was staged as a stark contrast to her first marriage. Dressed in radiant black and gold velvet, the colors of Brittany, and was surrounded by her own nobles, sending a clear message. This was not the wedding of a defeated princess, but rather the alliance of two equal sovereigns. Anne's second reign as Queen of France proved vastly different from her first. 15 years her senior, Louis treated Anne with public deference and what seemed to be genuine affection in private. Chroniclers noted that he frequently began official declarations by stating, "The Queen, my ... Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to support our work and never miss an upload. Like this video, drop a comment, and share it with others to show your support and help us grow this historical community.